the night the pine tree fell. My stepmother swung her hand skillfully. She left no bruise, only a final decision. My father watched the tinsel settle like silver snow and said, "You probably deserved it." I smiled, opened my phone, and changed the entire board. Family only shows its true nature when the frame is too narrow to hold everyone. My name is Mackenzie Ryan. I am 32 years old, and I am an operations manager at Northbridge Dynamics. I specialize in broken systems, and the first broken system I ever learned was my own family. In our house, history was a curated exhibit, and my stepmother, Vivian, was the chief curator. My half-sister, Dahlia, was the permanent centerpiece. Dahlia, born 8 years after Vivian married my father, was the miracle, the light. For my father's first marriage, was the logistical fact, the one who was already there. Our family history exists in 12 matching beige photo albums stored in the linen closet on the second floor. They smell faintly of cedar and aging plastic. For years, I thought the cropping in those pictures was just bad photography, but it was not. It was editorial choice. There I am. Or rather, there is my arm. The cuff of my blue sweater visible as I hand Dahlia her 5th birthday present. There is the back of my head, blurry in the foreground, as Dahlia and my father, Graham, pose by the lake. And then there are the ones where the silver scissors from Vivian's desk did their work. Photos where I was standing at the edge of the group, trimmed neatly away, leaving a slightly unbalanced composition that centered Dahlia perfectly. My absence made the picture cleaner. I was the one holding the camera. I was the one sent to the car to get the forgotten picnic basket while the real family photo was taken. I was the shadow that proved the sun was shining on my sister. The pivot point, the moment the vague discomfort crystallized into a hard, cold fact, came at Christmas when I was 17. It was our last Christmas in the old Stonehaven house before Vivian insisted they move to the suburbs. Dahlia was 9, old enough to command the room. The tree was enormous, dripping with gold and crimson ornaments Vivian had ordered from a catalog. I was wedged onto the sofa, my usual spot, slightly behind the armrest. Dahlia was in the center of the floor, ankle-deep in shredded wrapping paper. She had just received the main gift, a vintage-style telescope, and my father was trying to assemble the tripod. "Kenzie, be useful," Vivian said, not looking up from her eggnog. "The kitchen looks like a disaster zone. Go and start stacking the dishes." I always went. I rinsed the fine china plates, the ones we only used once a year, scraping hardened gravy into the trash. I listened to the muffled bursts of laughter from the living room. When I returned, drying my hands on a dish towel, the scene had shifted. My father had the telescope assembled. Dahlia was peering through the eyepiece, squealing with delight. Vivian was kneeling beside her, beaming, smoothing her hair. It was a perfect holiday moment. My seat on the sofa was gone. In my brief absence, someone, an uncle, maybe, had shifted. The spot where I sat, the small space I had occupied, was filled, but the true void was next to Dahlia. There, on the Persian rug, sat an empty upholstered dining chair. It had been brought in for the gift opening. It was my designated chair. No one had called me back. No one had waited. The ceremony of family continued, and my empty chair sat under the festive lights, a placeholder for someone who was not essential to the proceedings. I stood in the archway, holding the damp towel, and watched them. They were a perfect triangle. Father, mother, daughter. I was the external variable. I did not cry. I simply observed. I analyzed the system. The system required a center, and to have a center, you must have a periphery. I was the periphery. That night, I went online and applied to 3 universities, all of them at least 500 miles away from Stonehaven. I left 8 months later with 2 suitcases and the money I had saved from tutoring. I never asked them for $1 for tuition. I took out loans. I worked 3 jobs. I ate ramen noodles and slept on a mattress on the floor of a studio apartment. And I made a silent, binding promise to that 17-year-old girl in the archway. I will never be cropped out of my own life again. I will not be the one holding the camera. I will build the frame. And I did. At Northbridge Dynamics, I am Mackenzie Ryan. I manage a supply chain that spans 9 countries. I walk into boardrooms and my voice does not shake. I find inefficiencies and I fix them. I look at complex logistical maps and I see the missing pieces, the bottlenecks, the empty chairs in the system, and I fill them. I am respected. I am essential. Then, I drive the 2 hours back to Stonehaven for a holiday, and the moment I walk through my father's door, I am Kenzie again, the convenience kid, the one who knows how to reset the router, the one who can reach the heavy platters, the one who is expected to mediate when Dahlia, now 24, decides the holiday plans are boring. I was 32 when I met Miles Arden. He manages maritime logistics. He sees systems, too. He sees me. When I brought him home, Vivian was politely dismissive. My father was vaguely pleased. Dahlia found him a little intense. Miles, bless him, saw them as quirky. He did not see the rot beneath the floorboards. When he proposed, on the stormy coast of North Cascadia, I said yes with my whole chest. For the first time, I felt like the center of my own story. I decided we would be married the following June. I did not want a massive event. I wanted something real, something tangible. I spent weeks designing the invitations. I chose a heavy, forest green cardstock. I learned calligraphy. I bought a brass stamp with our initials, M, and bricks of dark gold sealing wax. I melted the wax by candlelight, pouring each seal, pressing the stamp, creating a small, perfect, permanent bond. Each one was an act of creation. Each one was my frame. Miles loved them. He held one up to the light. Kenzie, this is incredible. It's solid. I brought one to my father's house. It was 2 weeks before Christmas. Vivian and Dahlia were in the kitchen, scrolling through something on an iPad. I wanted to show you the invitation, I said, holding out the heavy green envelope. Vivian took it. She ran a finger over the wax seal. Oh, Mackenzie, that's very crafty. How ambitious. It's for June 4th, I said, my voice tighter than it is at Northbridge. June, she repeated, tapping the iPad screen. That's nice, dear. She looked up, her smile bright and shallow. Just try not to make it too ringer. You know? It's just, Dahlia has some very big news coming, and we're trying to keep the focus clear for her. You understand? I understood. My tangible, wax-sealed future was an inconvenience to Dahlia's hypothetical big news. What news? I asked. Oh, you know, Vivian waved a hand. Things, big things. I nodded. I took the invitation back and put it in my purse. The tension clung to the air for the next 2 weeks. It was in the way my father, Graham, set up the Christmas tree. He did it in a hurry, alone, one rainy afternoon. He bought one from a parking lot, and it listed slightly to the left. The lights were tangled, a messy ball, until I spent an hour unwinding them. The house was decorated, the lights were beautiful, but the atmosphere was wrong. It was the sharp, metallic smell of ozone from cheap wiring, the oppressive warmth from the fireplace, the sound of Vivian and Dahlia whispering in the kitchen, their voices dropping every time I entered the room. We were in the living room. It was the 23rd of December. Miles was coming up the next day, Christmas Eve. I was nursing a cup of coffee, watching my father adjust an ornament that didn't need adjusting. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. It was not a private text. It was the family group chat. The message was from Vivian. The most wonderful news. Dahlia and her amazing fiancé just secured the Starlight Pavilion for their wedding. It's an absolute dream. The only date they had available for all next year was June 4th. Can you believe the luck? So, everyone mark your calendars. We're all going to be there. Mackenzie, it's just easier for the whole family to focus on one event. So we'll celebrate your thing some other time. So happy for my girl. I read the message twice. June 4th, my date. It's just easier for the whole family. Easier, convenient. I looked up from the phone. Vivian was beaming, watching me, waiting for my performance of selfless joy. Dahlia was trying to look modest, but she was vibrating with triumph. I looked at my father. He was still fiddling with the ornament, his back to me. He already knew. He had allowed this. He had watched them take the scissors to my life and crop me out. A cold, calm clarity settled over me. It was the same feeling I got at 17. Standing in the archway, the system was not broken. It was working exactly as designed. I held my phone up. Vivian's smile faltered, expecting a fight, a scene. I typed one word. Okay. I hit send. Vivian looked confused. This was not the script. Dahlia looked disappointed, cheated of a drama. My father finally turned around. Kenzie, he started, his voice placating. It's just simpler. It's okay, I said. My voice was calm. It was my Northbridge voice, the voice that closes deals and reroutes cargo ships. I picked up my coffee cup. I took a sip. It was cold. I opened my calendar. I deleted the entry, my wedding, Starlight Pavilion. Then, I opened my navigation app. I scrolled through my saved pins, past my office, past my apartment, until I found the one I had saved 3 months ago, after a long drive through Whitlow Valley. A pin labeled Ravenfield Manor. I tapped it. I stared at the satellite image of the old stone walls and the sprawling apple orchards. I was not moving my wedding. I was moving the entire board, and I was finally building my own table. Christmas Eve, the 24th of December. The air in my father's house was so thick you could taste it, metallic and sharp like aluminum foil against a filling. Miles had arrived an hour earlier, bringing a bottle of 18-year-old whiskey and the clean, cold scent of the outdoors. He was trying. He was a good man, a man who believed in systems that worked, and this family was a system designed for sabotage. He kissed Vivian's cheek, shook my father's hand firmly, and told Dahlia her dress was lovely. It's just a little something, Dahlia said, smoothing the red velvet. We were thinking of using this color for the bridesmaids, at the pavilion. You see, the lighting is very dramatic. My father, Graham, poured the whiskey. Miles raised his glass. To family, and to new beginnings. Vivian smiled, but her eyes were on me. To Dahlia's new beginning, she corrected, raising her own glass of Prosecco. We were standing in the living room, near the tree, the same tree that listed to the left, the one my father had propped up with a folded copy of a boating magazine. The lights I had untangled were glowing, but they seemed to be working too hard, buzzing faintly against the oppressive silence. Right, Vivian said, clapping her hands once, a sharp, brittle sound. Before the gravy, the picture. I need the holiday card picture. She had a professional camera, a heavy DSLR, already mounted on a spindly black tripod near the doorway. This was her annual ritual, the performance of a happy, perfect family, captured and mailed to dozens of people who, I assumed, glanced at it before tossing it in the bin. Okay, everyone, arrangement, she commanded. The system asserted itself. Dahlia was placed in the center, on the antique settee. My father stood behind her, one hand on her shoulder. Vivian stood to his right. Miles, dear, you stand next to Graham, Vivian directed. Mackenzie, why don't you sit on the arm of the settee, next to Dahlia? I moved to perch on the armrest. It was low, and I had to hunch slightly to fit in the frame. Miles looked uncomfortable, a tall, solid man wedged into a space that did not fit him. This is ridiculous, Miles muttered, trying to smile. We look like hostages. Hush, I whispered, but I felt a small bubble of warmth. He saw it. Everyone smile, Vivian called out, setting the timer. She ran into the frame, taking her place beside my father, her hand gripping his arm. The camera beeped. A small red light blinked. 10 seconds. Beep, beep, beep. Dahlia shifted, fluffing her hair. My father straightened his tie. Beep, beep. The tripod was too close to the unstable tree, the leg, the one closest to the slick hardwood floor. slid half an inch. I saw it happening. It was the logistics of disaster. Beep! The tree, already leaning, passed its tipping point. It fell. It did not fall fast. It was a slow, majestic, terrible pivot. A deep groan of wood from the base, a whoosh of dry needles, and then the sound. The sound is what I will never forget. It was not a single crash. It was a cascade, a symphony of small, sharp deaths. The pop of the large, old-fashioned bulbs, the shatter of a dozen hand-blown German glass balls, the sound of pine sap and stagnant water hitting the floor, and then the tinkling, like tiny cruel bells, as thousands of shards of glass settled into the fibers of the Persian rug. For 1 second, there was absolute silence. The only sound was the click whir of the camera, capturing the tableau of our shocked faces. Then Dahlia's voice, high and sharp, cutting through the smell of pine. "Mackenzie, what did you do? Who pulled the cord?" I had not moved. My hands were in my lap. "I didn't touch anything," I said. The words felt heavy. "You must have," Vivian said. Her voice was terrifyingly calm. She was already assessing the damage, her eyes scanning the wreckage of her antique ornament collection. I saw a glint of silver near my foot, a wing. It was the angel that always went on top, a fragile piece from my father's childhood. From before Vivian, I leaned down, ignoring the velvet of Dahlia's dress, and reached for the broken piece. It was an instinct, the same one that made me untangle the lights, the same one that made me fix the router. I never touched it. Vivian moved so fast I did not register her intention. She was beside me, kneeling. She saw my hand reaching toward the most valuable broken thing on the floor. She did not wind up. She did not raise her voice. It was a short, sharp, efficient movement. Her hand, her rings cold, swung in a tight arc and connected with my cheek. The sound was small, shockingly intimate in the large room. It was not a movie slap. It was the sound of a file folder closing, a dull, final thwack. My skin screamed. My eyes watered instantly. A purely physical betrayal. But my mind went perfectly, terrifyingly still. "Vivian!" Miles yelled. He surged forward, pulling me back and up, shielding me with his body. "What the hell did you do?" Vivian was already standing, smoothing the front of her silk blouse. She did not look at him. She looked at me. She was reaching for the cord. She startled me. It was a flat, rehearsed lie, delivered with absolute conviction. Dahlia was examining her dress. "There's sap. This is ruined. Mackenzie, you are so clumsy." I looked past them all. I looked at my father. Graham was standing by the fireplace, his glass of whiskey still in his hand. He was not looking at my face. He was not looking at Vivian. He was looking at the fallen tree, this new, messy logistical problem that had landed in his living room. "Graham?" Miles said. His voice was raw with disbelief. "Are you going to say something?" My father sighed. He took a long drink of the whiskey. He finally turned his gaze to me, but it was unfocused, as if looking at a problem he did not want to solve. "Mackenzie, honestly," he said, his voice heavy with disappointment, "you probably did something to deserve it. You're always fiddling." Fiddling, the word hung in the air. I fiddled with the router, I fiddled with the lights, I fiddled with their logistics. I was the fixer. And now I was the one who had broken the scene. And there it was, the hook from the start, the confirmation. He had seen it, and he had made his choice. No one asked if I was hurt. No one asked if I was okay. Miles had his arm tight around me, a solid wall of muscle and anger. But he was an army of one, and he was outnumbered. Vivian was already in triage mode. "This is fine," she said, her voice brisk. "This is fixable. Graham, lift the trunk. Dahlia, get the broom and the dustpan. We are not letting this ruin the night." They moved. My father, setting his glass down, grabbed the trunk. Dahlia, complaining, went to the kitchen. They heaved the tree upright. It was a pathetic sight. Bare on one side, branches crushed. tinsel hanging in limp, defeated strands. "It's fine," Vivian snapped. "It's fine. We'll just shoot from the good side. The card has to go out." She walked back to the tripod. The camera had finished its cycle. She reset the timer. "Back in place. Everyone," she commanded. "Vivian, that's insane," Miles said. "You just hit her." "We are taking a family picture," Vivian replied, as if he had commented on the weather. She looked at me, her eyes cold, daring me to speak, to make a scene, to prove I was the problem. The little red light started to blink again. Beep, beep. "We're losing the light," she hissed. "Mackenzie, you're casting a shadow on Dahlia. Just step out, step back. We don't have time to reset the lighting. Just step to the side. We can edit you in later." A lie, a familiar one. "Miles, you move in," she ordered. "Fill the gap." Miles looked at me, his face a map of confusion and rage. "Go," I mouthed. I gave him the slightest nod. "Go. Watch. See?" He hesitated. Then slowly, rigidly, he stepped into my spot. Beep, beep, beep. I stepped back. I moved into the shadows of the archway, the exact spot where I had stood at 17. I watched them. My father, his forced smile. Dahlia, pouting. Vivian, beaming with manufactured joy. And Miles, my Miles, looking stiff and angry, trapped in their frame. Flash. The camera captured their perfect, broken family. I was in the dark, 3 feet away. My cheek was a dull, cold fire. I pulled my phone from my pocket. My thumbs were steady. I opened my contacts. Aunt Loretta, my father's estranged sister, who had called Vivian a social parasite at my graduation. Uncle Eamon, my mother's brother, the musician who lived in Ireland and always sent me books. Cousin Piper, his daughter, a violinist who lived in Chicago and had no tolerance for nonsense. I created a new group text. I did not type an explanation. I did not mention the tree, the slap, or the lie. I simply opened my navigation app, copied the coordinates for Ravenfield Manor, and pasted them into the message. Underneath the string of numbers, I typed one sentence. "Plans have changed. I'm getting married June 4th at Ravenfield. I am getting married where everyone gets a seat." I hit send. My phone buzzed almost immediately. A reply from Piper. "I am booking a flight. Tell me what you need." Then Aunt Loretta. "It's about damn time. I'll bring the good silver." Eamon. "I'll bring my guitar." Vivian, still smiling as the camera reset, saw the blue light of my phone illuminating my face in the shadows. Her smile tightened into a bloodless line. The flash fired again. She walked over to me, her footsteps silent on the rug. She leaned in, her perfume cloying. "What are you doing?" she hissed, her voice a low vibration of fury. "Put that phone away. Stop ruining the atmosphere. We are taking a family picture." I looked up from the screen, from the glowing green messages of support. The sting on my cheek had faded to a dull, cold numbness. "I'm not ruining it, Vivian," I said. My voice was quiet, but it was my Northbridge voice. "I'm creating a new one." We left my father's house on Christmas morning. Miles was waiting in his running car at the end of the driveway. I walked out before the sun was up, carrying a single overnight bag. The fallen tree was still in the living room, a dark, silent accusation. The air was cold, and I did not look back. Miles did not ask questions. He just turned the heater up and put his hand on my knee as we drove north, toward the mountains. We arrived at Ravenfield Manor as the watery light of Christmas Day broke over Whitlow Valley. Ravenfield is not the Starlight Pavilion. The pavilion is a glass box designed to impress. Ravenfield is a fortress built to endure. It is made of the valley's own gray stone, and the walls are covered in ivy that turns a deep, bruised purple in the winter. It was built 100 years ago, not as a showpiece, but as a working estate. The Great Hall has floors of massive flagstones, the same stones that once served as the floor of the cider press, worn smooth by a century of barrels and boots. I bought it last year. It was not an impulse. It was a contingency plan. I had divested a large block of my Northbridge stock options, funds I had earmarked for a future that felt increasingly unstable. I closed the sale on a Tuesday in April, quietly, without telling a soul. It was my fallback position. It was my own, solid ground. Miles had only seen pictures. He walked into the great hall, his boots echoing on the stone, and looked up at the high, dark beams. "Kenzie," he breathed, "this place is elemental." "It's honest," I said. The day after Christmas, the work began. This was not planning. This was construction. I did not call a wedding coordinator. I called a local crew. Maeve, the carpenter, arrived in a truck that smelled of cedar and diesel. She had strong hands and saw the world in measurements. Jasper, the electrician, was a man in his 60s who understood the logic of old houses and knew how to thread new life into them without breaking their character. And Ori, the gardener, who looked at the dormant, frozen apple orchard and saw not a dead field, but a room waiting to be filled. They stood in the great hall, sipping coffee from my thermos. "I need to host a wedding," I told them, "on June 4th, for about 70 people." Maeve looked around the hall. "You'll be tight," she said. 70 people, plus tables, plus a dance floor. It's a bottleneck." "We are not staying in the hall," I said. I walked them to the massive, arched doors that opened onto the stone terrace. "The ceremony will be in the orchard, and the dinner will be here." I pointed. "I need a table, a single, long table. I want it to start here, inside the great hall, and I want it to run all the way out, down the terrace, and stop at the first row of apple trees." Miles, who had been measuring the doorway, whistled. "Kenzie, that's 90, maybe 100 feet. 100 feet exactly," I said. "One table, one long continuous piece, no head table, no hierarchy, everyone sits together." Maeve tapped her pencil against her teeth. She was not looking at me. She was looking at the line I had drawn, from the warm hearth to the cold earth. "Reclaimed oak," she said, finally. "It has to be. Something with history. It will have to be built in sections, but joined so it feels like one, a single spine." "And lights," I said, turning to Jasper. "String lights, warm ones, like old tungsten. I want them draped from the beams in here, all the way down the length of the table, tangled in the apple branches." "That's a massive power draw," Jasper said, already scribbling on a notepad. "The wiring in this place can't handle it. I'll have to run a new, dedicated line from the main." "Do it," I said. "Make it safe. Make it warm." The next 5 months were a ritual. Miles and I drove to Ravenfield every weekend. We did not spend our time tasting cakes or choosing color swatches. We spent our Saturdays helping Maeve sand and stain the long planks of oak. We spent our Sundays helping Ori prune the apple trees, clearing a canopy for the lights and the guests. We were not decorating a venue. We were building an infrastructure for a new system. The smell of sawdust and wood stain, the scent of cold, clean stone, was washing the memory of dry pine and shattered glass from my lungs. I canceled the original invitations, the heavy green cardstock, and the pretentious gold wax seals. The new ones were printed on simple, thick cream card. They read, "Mackenzie Ryan and Miles Arden will be married on June 4th at Ravenfield Manor." Below that, a single line, "Thank you for showing up." The wedding favors were the most logical part. Ori and I found the original cider press in the barn. It was iron, rusted but solid. We spent a weekend in March disassembling, cleaning, and re-greasing the gears. I sourced 10 bushels of last season apples from a neighboring farm. We pressed them. We spent a day boiling the juice down into a dark, amber apple syrup. We bottled it in small 8-ounce flasks. Miles wrote the labels by hand. They did not say our names or the date. They just said, "For showing up." In early May, Miles stood on the terrace at dusk. "Kenzie," he said, zipping his jacket, "it's June in North Cascadia. It will be 50 degrees when the sun goes down. Your guests will freeze. I've handled it, I said. I went to the truck and pulled out a rolled blueprint. I spread it on the newly finished table. He stared. It was not a seating chart. It was a schematic, a detailed diagram of propane lines, manifolds, and heat exchangers. What am I looking at? He asked. It's the heating system, I said. Renting those ugly mushroom heaters is inefficient. The heat distribution is terrible. So, I designed a forced air system that runs directly under the table, a continuous, hidden duct. The heat will rise, warming everyone evenly. I pointed to my calculations in the margin. I've already calculated the BTU output and the propane flow rate. Jasper and I are installing the lines this weekend. Miles looked from the blueprint to my face. You're an operations manager, even at your own wedding. I'm just making sure everyone is comfortable, I said. That's the whole point. Miles had, at one point, suggested a band. We could get that 9-piece group from the city, he'd said. The one that does swing and Motown. No, I said, gently. It's not a performance. It's not a show. I opened the group chat with my family. Piper is bringing her violin. Uncle Eamon is bringing his guitar. That will be the music. The week before the wedding, the table was finished. It was a magnificent, dark river of wood, gleaming under the newly hung lights. It ran from the warmth of the hall into the cool promise of the orchard. Maeve was packing her tools, her work done. I walked over to hand her the final check. One last thing, she said. She knelt at the head of the table, the section that sat inside, by the fire. She pulled a small, sharp carving knife from her belt. For 10 minutes, she worked, small chips of oak falling to the stone floor. When she stood, she brushed the dust from her knees. There. I bent down to look, on the underside of the table, where no one would ever see it unless they were specifically looking for it, where a hand might graze it by accident. She had carved a single sentence. Whoever lacked a seat is welcome here. I ran my fingers over the fresh-cut letters. The wood felt impossibly warm. That night, the night before our wedding, the crew was gone. Miles was outside, checking the fuel levels in the generators. The long table was set for 70. The lights were on, a perfect golden canopy stretching from the hearth into the twilight. I walked into the great hall. The massive stone mantelpiece above the fireplace was bare. Save for a few dusty objects left by the previous owners, I picked one up. It was an old, simple wooden frame, an 8x10, holding a faded photograph of a horse. I unfastened the back. I removed the faded picture and the brittle cardboard behind it. I polished the dusty glass on my shirt. I put it back together, a simple, empty frame. I placed it on the windowsill, right where the great hall met the terrace, overlooking the head of the long, illuminated table. It was not a memorial for a moment that was lost. It was an opportunity, a space waiting to be filled, an invitation for a new picture, one with edges wide enough to hold everyone. The night of the slap. My phone became a command center, while Vivian, Graham, and Dahlia were sweeping up glass and rehanging ornaments on their broken tree. I was in the car with Miles, driving through the silent, snowy roads of North Cascadia, building a new infrastructure. The first group text I had sent, the one with the coordinates, was the beacon, but it was Piper, my cousin, who weaponized it. A new group chat appeared on my screen, less than an hour after we left. She had named it The Real Table. The cover photo for the chat was not a picture of me, or Miles, or any person. It was a photo she must have taken on a previous visit, a stark, beautiful shot of the frost-covered lawn at Ravenfield Manor, with the gray stone walls rising in the background. It was a picture of a place, a foundation. Piper, Eamon, and Aunt Loretta were in. Then, Piper started adding people. The names that appeared were a roll call of the periphery, my father's cousins from Lake Bray, the ones who always brought their famous potato salad to the family barbecue and were inevitably seated at the folding card table on the porch. My mother's side, who Vivian had systematically alienated over the last 2 decades, my oldest friends from college. the ones Vivian referred to as your little projects. The messages began to flow. It was not a chaotic stream of congratulations. It was a series of small, firm decisions, chiming in one after another like bells. The first RSVP came from Aunt Loretta. She was my father's older sister, a woman who had seen Vivian for what she was from day one and had been paying the price of exile ever since. Her text was short. Mackenzie, I'm confirming for one, and I am tired of performing. I'll be there a week early to help you set up. I am not bringing my fine silver. I am bringing my work boots. A minute later, a message from Uncle Eamon in Dublin. It was just a picture, a screenshot of an Aer Lingus booking confirmation, arriving at Stonehaven International Airport on June 1st. He followed it with a photo of his Irish passport sitting on top of his guitar case. The instrument is checked. The man is ready. See you in June, kid. Then, the tide turned. A message from my cousin David, the spokesman for the Lake Bray branch of the family. They were the second placers, the reliable, quiet relatives who were always expected to show up, contribute food, and then fade into the background while Dahlia performed. Hello, Mackenzie. We all just got Vivian's save the date for Dahlia's event. It's very shiny. We've been sitting at the kids' table for 20 years. We're always second choice. We're always the B-list invite, the afterthought, the ones called to fill empty seats. This year, we are choosing first. Please count all 8 of us from Lake Bray. We are coming to Ravenfield. I stared at the screen. 8 people. 8 people who had just declined an invitation to the Starlight Pavilion in favor of an apple orchard and a table made of reclaimed wood. The logistics brain in me took over. I put Miles on speakerphone as we drove. Miles, I said, my voice crisp, I need a spreadsheet. Now, open a new sheet. Columns, name, RSVP status, travel, lodging, dietary needs, and skill. Skill? He asked, his voice steady. He was already typing on his laptop, balanced on his knees in the dark car. Skill, I repeated. This isn't a catered event. This is a deployment. I need to know what people can do. The spreadsheet began to populate itself through the group chat. My colleagues from Northbridge Dynamics were next. I had sent a quiet email to my core team, explaining I was moving my wedding. My lead analyst, Ben, replied to the whole group. Team, Mackenzie has a conflict in her personal supply chain. I am taking a personal day on June 4th to provide on-site logistical support. My reason for leave will be observing a masterclass in family supply chain management. Within an hour, my entire department, 12 people, had requested the day off. We'll handle the bar, Ben texted me. We can calculate pour costs and manage inventory. It's just logistics. Then came the message that made me put the phone down for a moment. Mr. Halverson, my old neighbor, the one who used to live 2 doors down in Stonehaven before Vivian had pressured my father to move. He was in his 80s, a widower who lived on a pension and his garden. Piper must have found his number. His text was clearly dictated to his granddaughter. Dear Mackenzie, I hear you are building a good house. I would be honored to come. I do not have a gift, but I have my father's accordion. I do not know any of those modern wedding songs. I only know the real songs, the ones for dancing and the ones for when the work is done. May I bring it? I typed back, Mr. Halverson, you are the entire music budget. Yes, please, yes. The group chat, the real table, became a living thing. It was a project management channel. There was an unspoken rule, one that solidified in the first 24 hours. We would not mention Vivian. We would not mention Dahlia. We would not use the words slap, tree, or stole. We were not building this wedding against them. We were building it without them. We were simply naming the truth. And the truth was that a wedding was happening at Ravenfield. The conversation shifted to pure logistics. Piper. Okay, priority 1. Grandma Edith. She's 91 and she is not flying. She's in the nursing home in Oakhurst. That's a 5-hour drive. Who has an SUV and a patient demeanor? David, Lake Bray. My wife's minivan is comfortable. We will pick up Edith. We'll leave at dawn. Drive slow. We'll be her honor guard. Aunt Loretta. I've cataloged the kitchens at Ravenfield. There are 2 ovens, 1 commercial. We can handle the main course, but we need dessert. We need an army of bakers. A cascade of replies. I'm bringing my grandmother's apple pie recipe. I'm bringing 3 dozen lemon bars. I'll do the chocolate cake. It was not a competition. It was a potluck, elevated to an act of rebellion. The spreadsheet filled. The skill column was my favorite part. Jasper, electrician. Maeve, carpenter. Ori, gardening. Cider. Ben, inventory legit. David, transportation. Mr. Halverson, music. Aunt Loretta, head chef. Piper, violin, morale. My role was the one I always had, but this time, for my own project, I was the manager. I was Mackenzie Ryan, the one who saw the whole map. I sat at the kitchen island in my city apartment, Miles beside me, the glow of the laptop screen illuminating our faces. The RSVP status column was a long, unbroken line of green. Yes, 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 yes. 74 people, 74 yes votes. My heart rate, which had been a frantic, panicked drum since Christmas Eve, began to slow. It settled into a calm, steady rhythm. The buzzing in my ears stopped. The fire on my cheek, which I had felt for months, finally went cold. I was not a victim in a family drama. I was an operations manager executing a flawless pivot. Miles wrapped his arm around my shoulder, looking at the screen. You built an army, Kenzie. No, I said, checking off the last name. I just built a table. I scrolled to the bottom of the list. 74 names. I clicked on the blank cell below the last one, row 75. In the name column, I typed reserved. In the lodging column, on site. In the skill column, to be determined. And in the RSVP status column, I left the cell blank. Who is that for? Miles asked. I thought of my father, fiddling with an ornament. I thought of Dahlia, looking at her ruined dress. I thought of Vivian, her hand quick and efficient. That, I said, is the empty seat. It is for anyone who changes their mind at the 89th minute. A good system always has a contingency plan. June 4th, 4 o'clock in the afternoon. At the Starlight Pavilion, the rental chandeliers were working hard. They hung from the 20-foot ceilings, dripping with crystal, trying to fill the vast, empty air of the ballroom. The room was designed for 500. Dahlia had invited 200. Less than 90 had shown up. The white-gloved staff outnumbered the guests. The front rows, reserved for family, were a wasteland of empty chiffon-draped chairs. A few distant relatives dotted the landscape, sitting far apart, isolated islands in a sea of white. Vivian was backstage with Dahlia, pulling at the hem of her lace dress. The dress was magnificent, a confection of tulle and pearls that had cost more than my first car. It's just puckering, Vivian muttered, her fingers pinching the fabric. It's fine, Mom, Dahlia said. She sounded tired. It's not fine. It needs to be perfect. Vivian tugged again, then pulled her phone from her purse. She swiped the screen, checking for texts. So many people. The flu is just terrible this season, and the flight delays from Chicago, just dreadful. She was not looking at Dahlia. She was looking at the list of her own lies, trying to believe them. At that same moment, 90 miles away at Ravenfield Manor, the first guests were arriving. There was no ballroom. There was only the great hall, the stone terrace, and the apple orchard, a thin, unseasonable dusting of snow, a final breath of mountain winter, lay on the dormant grass. It was 50 degrees, and our breath plumed in the air, mixing with the smoke from the chimneys. Under the canopy of bare apple branches, Jasper's string lights glowed. They were not bright, but they were warm. They reflected off the thin layer of snow, creating a light that seemed to rise from the earth itself. 74 chairs were set along the 100-foot table. 74 people arrived, stamping snow from their boots, their arms full of the cakes and pies they had promised. They found their own seats. There was no chart. Aunt Loretta was in the kitchen, directing the main course. Ben from Northbridge was chilling wine in a snowbank, and Mr. Halverson was warming his fingers by the fire, his accordion resting in its case. My grandmother, Edith, 91 years old and wrapped in a plaid blanket, sat at the head of the table, inside the hall. David from Lake Bray had driven her himself, as promised. She was holding a gnarled, dry branch she had found in the orchard. At the pavilion, the music started. A string quartet, hired for $3,000, began playing a flawless, passionless Pachelbel's canon. Vivian gave Dahlia one last frantic adjustment. "Smile, darling. Everyone is watching." Dahlia walked out. She walked past the empty row reserved for Aunt Loretta. She walked past the empty row for the Lake Bray cousins. She walked past the empty seat that would have been mine. She looked small in the enormous, echoing room. The officiant, a man Vivian had hired for his distinguished white hair, opened his book. "We are gathered here today," he boomed, his voice amplified by a microphone, "to celebrate the sacred union of Dahlia and her fiancé, a union supported and cherished by the profound, unbreakable bonds of family." As he spoke, the photographer, a stressed young woman, was motioning to her assistant. She was cropping in tight, just on Dahlia and her groom. She could not get a wide shot. A wide shot would tell the truth. A wide shot would show the gaps. At Ravenfield, there was no microphone. There was only the wind. Piper stepped onto the stone terrace, her violin tucked under her chin. She was not playing Pachelbel. She looked at me, and she looked at Miles. She drew her bow, and a single, clear, resonant note cut through the cold air. It was the start of an old Irish air, a song of memory and homecoming. It was not a performance, it was a key, unlocking the silence. Miles took my hand. His hand was warm. We walked out of the great hall, past the empty frame on the windowsill, and took our place at the center of the long table, surrounded by the faces of our 74 guests. Grandma Edith struggled to her feet. She did not need a microphone. Her voice, thin but clear, carried down the length of the wood. She raised the dry apple branch. "I've been on this earth for 91 years, she said, her eyes on me. "People will always give you olive branches. They are a promise of peace, but they break. This," she held up the apple branch. "This is an apple branch in winter. It looks dead, but it's not. It's just enduring. This is endurance. This is what survives the cold. This is what knows how to bear fruit when the time is right. Good choice, Mackenzie." She sat, and the toast was done. As our officiant, a friend from college, began to speak, the phone started to appear. Not at Ravenfield, at the Starlight Pavilion. Piper's husband, who had stayed behind in Chicago, had been given a task. The moment Piper's violin note sounded, he posted the first picture to social media. It was a photo Maeve had taken an hour earlier, a wide shot, the widest possible. It showed the entire 100-foot table. It showed all 74 seats, full. It showed the glow of the lights, the steam rising from the coffee cups, the warm, real faces. It showed Aunt Loretta carrying a platter, and Mr. Halverson laughing. The caption was simple: "The real table, Ravenfield Manor, June 4th. At the pavilion, a second cousin, bored, was scrolling Instagram. She saw the photo. Her eyes widened. She nudged her husband. He pulled out his phone. She leaned forward and showed the woman in the row in front of her. A quiet epidemic started in the back rows of Dahlia's wedding, a digital whisper. Screens were passed from hand to hand. The guests, the 90 people who had shown up, were looking at their phones, then at the empty chairs surrounding them, then back at their phones. They were watching, in real time. The wedding, they had been told, was a small, private thing. They were seeing where everyone else had gone. Vivian, in the front row, could feel the shift. She saw the light of the screens. She saw the whispering. She turned, her smile a rigid mask of fury, to hiss at someone, but the officiant was at the critical moment. At Ravenfield, it was time for our vows. Miles read his from a piece of paper, his voice thick with emotion, promising to be my partner in logistics and in life. Then it was my turn. I had no paper. I had no script. I looked down the long single table, at every face that had chosen to be there. I looked at Maeve, and Jasper, and Ori. I looked at Mr. Halverson. I looked at Grandma Edith. Then I looked at Miles. I have spent a lot of my life standing just outside the frame, I said, my voice clear in the cold, still air. I was the one holding the camera, or the one sent to the car, or the one told to step back so I would not cast a shadow. I learned that frames can be used to crop people out, to make them invisible. I am done with that. Today, I am not just standing in the frame. I am holding the frame. This, I motion to the table, to the people, to the manor. This is our frame, and it is wide enough to hold all of us. Miles, I promise to hold it with you. I finished. There was a beat of silence, just the sound of the wind in the orchard. Then, the applause. It was not polite. It was a roar. It was 74 people stamping their feet on the cold stones. It was cheering, and it mixed with the wind, a great, warm, human sound that rolled across the valley. It was the sound of a new system, booting up. The applause, when it came, was not just for me and Miles. It was, I realized, for the table, for the 74 people who had come, who had baked pies, who had driven 5 hours to pick up a 91-year-old woman, who had strung lights in the snow. They were applauding themselves for showing up. The sound rolled from the apple orchard, down the long 100-foot table, and into the great hall, where it echoed off the old stone. It was a roar. When it faded, there was a new sound. It was the sound of 74 people exhaling, laughing, shifting in their seats. It was the sound of chairs scraping on the terrace. And then, from the hearth, Mr. Halverson drew a long, wheezing, beautiful chord from his accordion. He began to play. It was not a wedding march. It was a real song, a tune with dirt on its boots, and people began to clap in time. Aunt Loretta and the Lake Bray cousins emerged from the kitchen, bearing massive wooden platters laden with food. The smell of roasted root vegetables, thyme, and slow-cooked beef rolled down the table. Ben and the Northbridge crew began a meticulously organized ballet of pouring wine. "Well," Miles said, his voice low and warm in my ear. He kissed my temple. "That's the ceremony done, Mrs. Arden." I leaned into him, the tension that had lived in my shoulders since December, the cold knot of ice that had formed the moment I saw Vivian's text about the Starlight Pavilion. Finally dissolved. It drained out of me and into the cold, honest ground of Ravenfield. "It's time to eat," I said. We turned to walk toward our seats, in the exact center of the table. My pocket buzzed. The vibration was alien. It was a shrill, digital, angry sound against the folksy accordion and the wind. It was the outside world, the old system, trying to breach the wall. Miles saw my expression. "Ignore it. It can wait." "No," I said. "It's the last piece of management." I pulled the phone from the pocket of my simple white wool dress. The screen was bright in the dusk. "Vivian." My thumb hovered over the accept button. I felt Miles move closer. A solid, warm wall of support. I did not need it. My hand was perfectly steady. I was Mackenzie Ryan. I managed broken systems. I answered. "Hello, Vivian?" Her voice was not the shriek of fury I had expected. It was worse. It was the voice she used for customer service, for headwaiters, for people she considered her inferiors. It was a voice of pure, polished, controlled contempt. "Mackenzie, I have you on speakerphone. Your father is here, beside me. I want him to hear this." I waited. I heard the cavernous, empty echo of the pavilion ballroom behind her voice. "I hope," she continued, That you are truly, deeply satisfied with yourself. I cannot begin to describe the humiliation you have caused. You have embarrassed this entire family, our guests. The few who did not listen to your poison are wandering around confused, asking where everyone is. You have devastated your sister. You have taken her one perfect day and you have made it about your own petty, childish jealousy. I looked out. I saw the table. I saw the lights. I saw Aunt Loretta laughing as she passed a platter to Mr. Halverson. I saw the Lake Bray cousins, my second-place family, arguing happily over who got the last piece of bread. I held the phone up. "Vivian," I said, and my voice was calm. It was my Northbridge voice. "I am not embarrassed. I am not jealous. I just invited people who did not need an excuse to show up." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. She had expected me to scream. She had expected me to cry. She had expected a fight. She had not expected a fact. "How dare," she started, but she was interrupted. A new voice, sharp and crackling, cut in. It was my grandmother, Edith, who had been sitting near us, had recognized Vivian's tone. She had pushed her walker aside and was standing next to me, her hand gripping my arm. "Vivian?" Edith's voice was thin, but it cut through the speaker like a razor. "This is Edith. You put me on that speakerphone. You listen to me. You are talking about embarrassment? You, who stole this child's wedding day? You, who has spent 20 years trimming this family like a dead hedge? You chose ease over conscience. You chose a shiny floor over a solid foundation. You chose Vivian, and you chose wrong. This is not Mackenzie's embarrassment. This is yours." The silence on the other end was absolute. I could feel Vivian, 90 miles away, reeling, her script gone, her audience captured. Then a mumble. My father, Graham. "Mother, please." His voice was weak, pleading. "Let's not. Vivian, just hang up, Mackenzie. I just wanted peace. I just wanted it to be easy." Peace, easy. The words he had used his entire life to justify his own cowardice. Before I could answer, another voice joined. Piper, violin bow in hand, had come up behind me. She leaned in, her voice clear and strong. "Uncle Graham, this is Piper. I'm listening. Peace is what we have here. Peace is a 100-foot table with 74 seats, and every seat is full. Peace is when everyone is welcome. What you wanted was quiet, and quiet is what you get when one person agrees to stand in the dark so everyone else can have a good time. Mackenzie is done standing in the dark." The phone line was not silent now. I could hear a muffled sound. Vivian's hand over the receiver, hissing something at my father. I heard disloyal and ungrateful. Then a sharp, final click. Vivian had hung up. The connection was severed. The old system, faced with an audit it could not pass, had simply shut down. I lowered the phone. The accordion music swelled, as if Mr. Halverson had instinctively known the void needed to be filled with something real. Miles did not say, "I told you so." He did not say, "Are you okay?" He simply reached up and brushed his thumb against my cheek. The one that had been struck 6 months before, the phantom sting, the one I had carried as a cold memory, was gone. "I am," I said, answering the question he had not asked. I turned. Edith was smiling, a fierce, grim, satisfied smile. "Well," she said, "that's that. I'm 91 years old and I'm starving. Let's eat." 90 miles away, at the Starlight Pavilion, Vivian stabbed the end call button on her phone. Her face, which had been a mask of controlled poise, was white with a rage that was almost green under the cold chandelier light. "Graham," she hissed, "you said nothing." "What was I supposed to say?" he whispered, shrinking. "That was Mother." "I don't care. They plotted this." Dahlia was standing near the towering, untouched wedding cake, a 7-tiered monstrosity of white fondant. She had been watching her mother's performance. She had seen the confident, cruel smile curdle into shock, then into pure fury. She watched her mother stalk away to the bridal suite, her father trailing uselessly behind. The photographer, trying to earn his fee, clapped his hands with false enthusiasm. "All right, let's get some candid guest shots." He looked around. The 90 guests were clustered in small, awkward groups, talking quietly, nursing their champagne. The front rows were a graveyard of empty chairs. Let's tighten this up," the photographer said. He began, frantically, to pick up the empty chiffon-draped chairs, hauling them two at a time and stacking them against the far wall. He was trying to hide the gaps. He was cropping the room in real time, trying to manufacture a crowd that did not exist. Dahlia watched this. She watched the staff clear untouched plates of appetizers. She watched the string quartet pack their instruments. Their contracted time finished. Then she saw it, that second cousin, the one from my father's side, sitting alone. She was looking at her phone. The screen was bright. The cousin saw Dahlia looking and quickly locked the screen, but it was too late. Dahlia had seen the picture. She had seen the long, glowing table. She had seen the snow. She had seen the crowd of faces, all of them laughing, all of them warm. She recognized Aunt Loretta. She recognized the Lake Bray cousins. She saw Piper, holding her violin. She saw all the people who were supposed to be sick, all the people delayed by flights. She walked, her movements stiff in the expensive dress, into the ladies' lounge. It was empty, a sterile room of white marble and gold taps. She leaned against the cold wall. She pulled out her phone. Her hands were shaking. She typed. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was not a call. It was a text. From Dahlia. I read the single, small line of text. Are you happy? I stared at it. The words of a child. The words of a rival. The words of a sister. Was it an accusation? Or was it, for the first time, a real question? I thought about the cold stone under my feet. I thought about Miles, his hand now firmly in mine. I thought about Maeve's carving under the table, the one that welcomed those who had no seat. I typed my reply. Yes, I am. I hope you are too. I hit send. I watched the screen. The small gray bubble with the 3 pulsing dots appeared. Dahlia was typing. The dots vanished. They reappeared. Typing. They vanished again. No message came. The silence, this time, was hers. It was the sound of her, alone in a cold, white room, staring at an answer she could not compute, the first true and unmanaged words that had ever passed between us. I put the phone back in my pocket. I did not need to see what she would write. The conversation was over. The work was done. Mackenzie, Miles said, pulling out my chair. I sat. The wood, warmed by the hidden heating system, was solid and real beneath me. Someone passed me a plate. Mr. Halverson started a new song. I took a bite. It was the best meal I had ever tasted. I put the phone back in my pocket. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full. The space that Vivian's anger had occupied was instantly rushed by the sounds of Ravenfield, the murmur of 74 conversations, the clink of forks on plates, and the deep, wheezing breath of Mr. Halverson's accordion. The tension, the cold wire that had been strung taut inside my chest for 6 months, did not just snap. It unspooled. It dissolved into the cold ground. Miles had pulled out my chair, the one at the exact center of the 100-foot table. I sat, and the oak, warmed by the heating system I had designed, felt solid and alive beneath me. A 1 and a 2, Mr. Halverson counted, and he began a new song. It was not a wedding song. It was a polka. It was loud and joyous and completely undignified. Down at the end of the table, near the orchard, I saw Maeve. Her work was long finished, her check cashed, but she was still here, nursing a beer. She was standing next to the last chair, the 75th, the one I had marked as reserved on my spreadsheet. It was the only empty seat. She was tying something to it. It was a length of wide, dark green satin ribbon, the same color as the invitations I had thrown away. She tied it from one arm of the chair to the other, a soft, respectful barrier. It was not a rope, it was a marker. She saw me watching and raised her bottle in a toast. "For the one who was forgotten," she called out, her voice carrying over the music. "For whoever is still on their way." Some of the guests cheered, not even knowing the full story, but understanding the sentiment. They understood a table that keeps a seat. The food, when it came, was a logistical miracle orchestrated by Aunt Loretta. There were no waiters in tuxedos. The Lake Bray cousins and the Northbridge team moved as one, bringing out massive platters of food, family style. There was no choice of, there was only all of. Mr. Halverson's polka wound down to a wheezing, happy halt. He wiped his brow. "That is a thirsty song," he announced. Ben from Northbridge appeared at his elbow with a fresh glass of wine. Now, Mr. Halverson said, catching his breath. "A quiet one, an old one. My father used to sing this when he came home from the sea. I do not know all the words, but I know the tune." He began to play. It was a simple, rising and falling melody. It was a tune of 4 chords and 1,000 years. It sounded like the wind. After a moment, Uncle Eamon, sitting 20 feet away, picked up his guitar. He listened, found the key, and began to strum, giving the old accordion a spine of strings. Aunt Loretta, at the other end of the table, began to hum. Then, without instruction, without a leader, it happened. A few voices started, then more. We were not singing words. We were just singing the tune. 74 voices, humming, lying, finding a harmony. It was messy, it was imperfect, and it was the single most beautiful choir I had ever heard. The song, which had belonged to one old man, now belonged to all of us. When it finished, the applause was soft and warm. Uncle Eamon stood, his guitar resting on his knee. He raised his glass. "I have flown across an ocean for many occasions," he said, his Dublin accent rolling the words. "Most of them were about obligation, about showing your face, about ticking a box for the family, so you would not be talked about later." He smiled, a wide, true smile. "This is the first time I have crossed an ocean for joy. This is the first time I have come, not for duty, but for love. And I do not just mean the love between these two." He nodded at me and Miles. "I mean this, the love that makes you bake a pie, the love that makes you drive 5 hours to fetch an old woman, the love that makes you build a table." He raised his glass high. "To Mackenzie and Miles, and to every single person at this table who came here for love, and not for obligation." "To love," the table roared back, and the clinking of glasses sounded like bells. Beside me, Grandma Edith set her wine glass down with a shaking hand. She had been quiet, watching, absorbing. "He is right," she said, her voice a dry whisper just for me. "It was a good toast," I said, leaning in. "Not about that," she said. "About the pictures." She was looking at Piper, who was setting up a large camera on a tripod at the end of the hall, trying to frame the entire sprawling scene. "What about them?" I asked. Edith looked down at her own knotted hands, resting on the plaid blanket. "My sister, Clara, her wedding, it was 1952. I think, a long time ago, I was her maid of honor. I had a dress of blue taffeta. I thought I was the grandest thing in the world." She paused, lost in the memory. "Clara was marrying up, a rich family from the city. They thought we were simple, farmers. Her new mother-in-law, a woman who looked like she'd been soaked in vinegar. She kept looking at me." "What did she do?" "When it was time for the big family portrait," Edith said, her voice flat. "The photographer was setting up his lights. The mother-in-law came over to me. She smiled, a little thin smile. She said, 'Edith, darling, you are such a help. The photographer is having trouble with the shadows. Would you be a dear and just hold this reflector for him? Just stand over there, to the side. Yes, just a bit more. My throat closed. I saw it. I saw her. A young woman in a blue dress, standing in the dark. I stood there, Edith whispered, for 10 minutes, holding a big silver disc, smiling, so proud to be helping. The flash popped, and they all looked beautiful. And you? I asked, though I knew the answer. I was 3 feet out of frame, the most helpful, invisible maid of honor in history. They cropped me, right out of the family, and I was the one holding the light for them. She looked up, and her eyes, 91 years old, were as sharp as glass. Vivian is not a new invention. Mackenzie, she is just the same old story, a coward with a pair of scissors. I am so very proud of you, she said, patting my hand, that you decided to stop holding the reflector. As if summoned, Piper called out, "Okay, I need it, the big one. Everyone, stay in your seats. Look at me." She stood by her tripod, peering through the lens. "I need the widest lens I have for this family," she muttered. "Okay, Mackenzie, Miles, look here. Everyone, raise a glass. On 3. 1, 2, 3. The flash was bright, illuminating the entire hall, catching the snow, the lights, the steam from the food, and 74 laughing faces. Piper checked the back of the camera, and a grin of pure, triumphant joy split her face. "Got it." She unplugged the camera and ran it down the table, her boots thudding on the stone. She knelt beside me, shielding the small screen from the light. "Look," she whispered, her voice fierce. I looked. It was not a picture. It was a census. It was a map. It captured the entire 100-foot table, from Edith in the warm hall to Maeve's green-ribboned chair in the cold orchard. Every person, every light, every smile. Nobody was in shadow. Nobody was on the edge. Nobody was cropped. I could not speak. I just traced the image on the screen. Miles leaned his chin on my shoulder, his arms around me. "You see?" he said, his voice low. "Other people build stages. They are tall, and they are small, and they are designed to make everyone else look up at the one person in the light. But you build tables." He kissed my temple. "I love the way you build tables." A small voice broke the moment. "Mommy, I have to go potty." It was a little girl, one of the Lake Bray children, about 5 years old, pulling on her mother's sleeve. "And," the girl added, "I want to sit by the Snow Queen." She was pointing directly at Grandma Edith, whose white hair and plaid blanket did make her look rather royal. Edith chuckled. "Well, come along, little one. There is room." "Oh, no, Mrs. Edith, she's fine," the mother began, flustered. "There's no space." But the system was already at work. It was the moment I, as an operations manager, will remember for the rest of my life. No one gave an order. No one was asked. The man sitting next to Edith, one of my colleagues from Northbridge, immediately stood. "I suddenly need to check the bar inventory," he announced, grabbing his plate. The woman next to him, Aunt Loretta, slid her chair down a foot. The person next to her slid down. Like a ripple, like a single, silent command, the entire line of 74 people shifted, they adjusted, they compressed, they moved as one organism, accommodating the need. In less than 10 seconds, a full, child-sized space had materialized next to Edith. The little girl's mother stared, mouth open. The child herself just beamed, ran, and scrambled into the seat, tucking herself under Edith's blanket. The table had made room. At that exact moment, a deep, resonant sound rolled across the valley. Bong. Jasper, it turned out, had fixed the old manor bell. It was 9 o'clock. The sound, deep and old, vibrated in the stones under our feet, and the string lights, hanging in their long golden chains, swayed in the wind, as if nodding. Yes, this is how it works. Yes. I put my hand on the solid oak of the table. I ran my fingers along the edge, feeling the history in the wood. My hand brushed the underside. I felt it. Maeve's carving. My fingertips traced the sharp, new-cut letters. Whoever lacked a seat is welcome here. The wood was warm. My hand was steady. I looked at Miles. I looked at Edith, who was now deep in conversation with a 5-year-old. I looked at the long, glowing, unbroken line of my family. And I looked at the empty chair at the end, the one with the green ribbon. I made a decision, a house rule. It was the first rule of Ravenfield. That chair would always be at our table, at every dinner, every holiday. It was not a chair for a ghost. It was a chair for a possibility. It was the physical manifestation of a contingency plan. It was the seat for the truth that was still on its way. The wedding party at Ravenfield did not end at 9 o'clock. It shifted. The plates were cleared, but the table remained full. The apple pies and lemon bars, the potluck of rebellion, were brought out. The Northbridge crew, now off duty, built a massive bonfire in the stone pit at the edge of the orchard. Mr. Halverson's accordion gave way to Uncle Eamon's guitar, and an impromptu, chaotic, joyous sing-along began. Miles and I sat at the table, wrapped in a blanket, watching the light of the fire dance on the faces of our family. This was not a reception, it was a homecoming. But the digital shockwave was just beginning. Piper's one wide-angle photo, the one captioned, "The Real Table," had been seen, and it had been screenshotted. It was now traveling through the networks of our extended family, a piece of irrefutable visual evidence. The other relatives, the ones who had stayed neutral, the ones who had sent polite regrets to both me and Dahlia to avoid the drama, were now seeing the two stories side by side. On one side of their screens, Vivian had begun posting her professional photos from the Starlight Pavilion. They were, as expected, technically perfect. They were cropped tight. There was a beautiful, dramatic shot of Dahlia and her groom under the massive chandelier. There was a close-up of the 7-tiered cake. There was a carefully framed photo of Vivian and Graham, smiling, their heads close together. In every single image, the photographer had skillfully, desperately, avoided the room. Every photo was a close-up. Every photo was a lie. On the other side, there was Piper's photo, the one that told the truth, the one that was all about the room. The comments section on Vivian's social media page, which had started as a stream of congratulations and beautiful, began to falter. A cousin from my father's side, who had attended the pavilion wedding, was the first to crack. She commented, "It was a lovely ceremony, but this photo doesn't show the whole picture." A minute later, a Lake Bray cousin replied to that comment with a link to Piper's post. "This is the whole picture," she wrote. The digital dam broke. It was no longer about two weddings, it was about two realities. The people who had been at the pavilion, the 90 who had sat in the echoing, empty hall, now felt like dupes. The people who had been at Ravenfield, the 74, felt like witnesses, and the people who had stayed home, the neutrals, they were the ones who saw it most clearly. They had not been in the emotional trenches. They were just looking at the evidence. And the evidence was clear. One family was a performance, the other was a table. I was not watching this. I was blissfully ignorant, drinking mulled wine by a bonfire. But Miles, checking his phone for a moment, let out a low whistle. "Kenzie, you might want to see this." I read the comments, I saw the digital civil war, and I closed the phone. "It's not my system to manage," I said. "It's just feedback." But one message, arriving late that night after the last guest had found their bed, was not public. It was a private, direct message to me. It was from an aunt I barely knew, a friend of Vivian's from her social circle, a woman who had always treated me with a kind of polite, distant pity. Her message was long, and it was a confession. "Dear Mackenzie," it began, "I was at Dahlia's wedding today. I sat in the front row, and I smiled, and I told Vivian how beautiful everything was. I have been telling Vivian that for 20 years. I always thought it was the polite thing to do. I thought I was being a peacemaker. I thought I was being kind. Tonight, I saw the pictures from your event. I saw who was there. I saw Edith and Loretta and all the Bray family. I saw faces I have not seen at a Ryan event in a decade, and I had a terrible sinking realization. I have not been polite. I have been apathetic. I have not been a peacemaker. I have been a coward. I have been so busy being nice that I completely forgot to be good. I chose to be civil over being truthful. I realize now that my civility was just a form of indifference to what was really happening. I am so very, very sorry for my part in it. I read it twice. This was a different kind of shockwave. This was the first crack in the wall of social convenience that had protected Vivian my entire life. I replied, "Thank you for your honesty." The next morning, the day after the wedding, Ravenfield was quiet. The bonfire was a circle of cold ash. The table was covered in empty glasses and crumbs of pie. Miles and I, along with Piper, Eamon, and a few others, were quietly, happily cleaning up. We were a team. My phone, resting on the table, buzzed. A text. From Graham, my father. It was not a long, angry tirade. It was not a defense. It was just one defeated line. "I need to talk to you, if you will let me." The old Mackenzie, the 17-year-old in the archway, would have replied with 1,000 questions. Why? What could you possibly say? Why now? The new Mackenzie, the one who had built a table, saw this for what it was. It was not a request for a negotiation. It was a request for an invitation. He was standing outside the gate, asking if the table was for him, too. I did not text him back. I texted the family group, the original, broken one, the one with Vivian, Graham, and Dahlia. I typed one simple message. "Ravenfield, Sunday, 2 o'clock, the long table. There are enough seats." I hit send. The reply from Vivian was, as I expected, absolute silence. From Dahlia, a single, cryptic, emoji appeared, a green leaf, an apple leaf. Maybe. It was not a yes. It was not a no. It was just a leaf, an acknowledgement of the message. From my father, a simple, "Okay." I took a deep breath. Then I sent one more message, to the same group. I was setting the terms of engagement. I was defining the new system. You do not need to come with an apology. You do not need to come with an explanation. You just need to show up. On Sunday, Ravenfield was no longer a wedding venue. It was just home. Miles and I had spent the day stacking wood. The 100-foot table was now a permanent fixture, wiped clean, its dark oak gleaming. Piper and Eamon were leaving that afternoon. As Piper was packing her violin, she stopped. She walked into the great hall, where the table began. She picked up a stack of placemats and 4 sets of simple, clean silverware. Wordlessly, she set 4 places at the head of the table, the part that sat inside by the hearth. She did not make it a performance. She just did it. 4 placemats, 4 forks, 4 knives, 4 glasses. Maeve stopped by. She said she was there to check a loose board on the terrace, but I knew she was there to see. She stood in the great hall, looking at the 4 empty place settings. She walked over to the wall, where Jasper had installed the dimmers for the string lights. She turned the knob, lowering the light just a fraction. "There," she said, mostly to herself. "The light has to be forgiving. It needs to be warm enough for people to be honest in." Grandma Edith was the last to leave. David and the Lake Bray cousins were waiting in their minivan to take her back to Oakhurst. She stood with me on the terrace, gripping her walker, looking at the long, empty waiting table. "You invited them," she said. It was a statement, not a question. "I did," I replied. "Piper set places for them." Edith nodded, her eyes on the distant mountains. "That's good. That's your part. You built the table. You sent the invitation. Now, Mackenzie, comes the hard part." She turned to look at me, her gaze fierce. "Don't expect them. Don't sit at the window, waiting. Don't poison your own peace by needing them to walk through the door. You just let them come, or not. The table is here. Either way, the work is done." I nodded. She was right. The system was built. The invitation was sent. It was no longer my responsibility to manage their attendance. I hugged her. "Thank you, Grandma. For the branch. For everything." "Nonsense," she said, patting my back. "It was the best wedding I've ever been to. Now, go. Go be with your husband. The table is ready. Let it do its job." I watched the minivan pull away, its red taillights disappearing down the long gravel drive. Miles came and stood beside me, sliding his arm around my waist. The sun was getting low, and the air was cold. 2:00, he said, quietly. It was 1:50. "I know," I said. I was not nervous. I was not angry. I was not even hopeful. I was just ready. I was an operator, watching a system I had built, waiting to see if the new inputs would arrive. I watched a single drop of melted snow, left over from the freak June storm, fall from the eave of the roof. It landed on the dark oak of the table, a perfect, clear bead of water. It shone for a moment in the low light, and then, slowly, it began to evaporate into the wood. At 2:00, on the dot, I heard it, the crunch of tires on the gravel driveway. A sound this old house was not used to. It was a heavy car, a luxury sedan, the kind that whispers on asphalt but complains on real earth. Miles took my hand. We were standing in the great hall, by the fireplace. We did not go to the door. We waited. The sound of 3 car doors, closing one after another, a heavy thud, a lighter thunk, a final, hesitant click. They appeared in the arched doorway, silhouetted against the bright, cold Sunday afternoon. Graham first, his shoulders slumped, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. Vivian, behind him, wearing a cashmere coat that was entirely too thin for the mountains. Her posture was rigid. A woman marching into a hostile boardroom, and Dahlia, last, her face pale, her gaze on the ground, trailing them like a child. They stopped on the stone threshold, as if an invisible line prevented them from entering. "Hello," I said. My voice was even. It did not echo. The room, the house, the table, it all absorbed the sound. "Mackenzie," my father said. He looked past me, at the long, dark river of oak that ran through the house and out onto the terrace. He had seen the pictures. He had not understood the scale. "Come in," Miles said. He was a solid presence beside me. He was not a bodyguard. He was just the other half of the foundation. They stepped inside. Vivian's eyes were everywhere. At the high beams, the old stone, the hanging lights, the 4 place settings Piper had left. She was assessing, calculating, trying to find the flaws in the system. Dahlia just stared at the table. "Please," I said, motioning to the chairs. "Sit." They sat at the head of the table, in the 4 chairs Piper had designated. It felt stiff, formal, like a treaty negotiation. I had made hot cocoa. I had not wanted to offer them wine or coffee. I wanted to offer them something from childhood, something that was impossible to weaponize. I went to the kitchen and poured 4 mugs, the steam rising in the cool air. I placed a mug in front of each of them. My father's hands, I noticed, were shaking as he wrapped them around the warmth. Vivian took hers, her painted nails tapping the ceramic. Dahlia held hers with both hands, as if it were a lifeline. Miles and I sat opposite them. And then, silence. It was not the angry, oppressive silence of their house. It was a different kind. It was the vast, patient, minimalist silence of Ravenfield. It was the sound of the old refrigerator humming in the kitchen, the sound of the wind moving through the bare apple branches, the low electric thrum of Jasper's string lights, the ones Maeve had said were for forgiveness. We just sat, for 1 minute, for 5. My father looked at his mug. He cleared his throat. I have been thinking," he began, his voice rough. He looked up, not at me, but at the long table that stretched away from him. "For 20 years, I thought I was keeping the peace. I thought that was my job, to keep things quiet, smooth, easy." He shook his head, a small, tired movement. "I was wrong. I was just a coward. I confused peaceful with fair, and it was never fair to you. Mackenzie, I see that now. It was just easy for me. He said it, the word, easy, the thing Vivian had always chosen. I nodded. I did not say, it's okay. I did not say, I forgive you. I just accepted the statement. It was a piece of data, long overdue. Dahlia was next. She had been tracing the rim of her mug with one finger. I lied, she said. Her voice was small, almost a whisper. I told Mom that June 4th was the only date the pavilion had. It was not. They had 3 other dates, in August, in September. She finally looked up, and her eyes, so much like my father's, were filled with a desperate, childish honesty. I picked your date. I picked it because I was afraid. I was afraid that your wedding, your thing, would be better, that you were building something, and I was just putting on a show. I was afraid of losing the spotlight. She took a sharp, shuddering breath. And then I did. For real. Everyone at my wedding. They were looking at their phones. They were looking at this, at your table, at everyone. Everyone who was supposed to be mine. Vivian, who had been listening to this, her face a mask of stone, finally spoke. She was not looking at any of us. She was looking at her own manicured hands, which were twisting the silk scarf in her lap. I always chose the easy path, she said. Her voice was flat, dead. Every time there was a difficult moment, I chose what was easiest. It was just simpler. It was the same word my father had used. Simpler, easier, the entire vocabulary of my childhood, laid bare on the table. It was not an apology. It was a confession of a life's operating principle. I let their words settle. Graham's cowardice, Dahlia's jealousy, Vivian's convenience. I looked past them, down the length of the table, to the far end, out on the terrace, where the single, empty chair sat, the green ribbon fluttering in the breeze. That chair, I said, pointing. They all turned to look. The one with the ribbon, that used to be my chair, I said. It was the arm of the sofa when I was 17. It was the space 3 feet outside the camera's frame. It was the spot in the archway, holding the damp towel. It was the place for the convenience kid, the one who was always fiddling. I looked back at them. It's not my chair anymore. Now, it's just a permanent part of the table. It's the chair for anyone who is late to the truth. It's always here. It's always waiting. No one cried. This was not a scene from a movie. This was the quiet, hard work of logistics. The only sound was the deep, collective breath we all took, the hum of the lights, the house exhaling. The tension was gone, replaced by a vast, cold emptiness. I stood up. Aunt Loretta left half an apple pie, I said. The one from the wedding. I went to the kitchen. I heard Miles stand, the scrape of his chair on the stone. He came with me. I cut 4 slices of pie. He put them on the plates Piper had set out. We worked together, a quiet, efficient team. We brought the plates back to the table. We set them down. Eat, Miles said, his voice gentle but firm. We can talk more after, or not, but you should eat. We ate. In silence, we ate the pie that had been baked in rebellion. Graham ate his quickly, like a chore. Dahlia ate hers slowly, as if studying it. Vivian took one small, surgical bite, and then another. She finished the whole slice. When it was over, the light in the valley was beginning to fade. Maeve's forgiving light took over, the string lights casting a warm, golden glow on the 4 empty pie plates. My father stood. We should go. It's a long drive. Dahlia stood, zipping her jacket. Vivian stood. Graham and Dahlia walked toward the door, their footsteps loud in the quiet hall. They were waiting. Vivian did not follow. She stood at the table, looking at the empty plates. I began to gather them. I picked up my father's, then Dahlia's. I turned to take them to the kitchen. Vivian just stood there, watching me. I walked past her. I went to the large, deep farmhouse sink. I turned on the hot water, The steam felt good. I began to wash the dishes. I washed my father's plate. I washed Dahlia's. I washed Vivian's, and Miles's, and my own. The whole time. She stood in the doorway of the kitchen. She did not speak. She did not offer to help. That would have been a performance, a lie. She just stayed. She watched me do the work. She was a witness to the cleanup. I washed the forks. I dried the plates. The ceramic warmed from the water. I put them away in the heavy oak cabinet. Only when the last plate was stacked and the sink was empty and I was drying my hands on a towel did she move. I turned. She was looking at me. Her face was empty. The mask was gone. I did not know this woman. She nodded. Once, a short, sharp acknowledgement. It was not forgiveness. It was not an apology. It was, I realized, the first honest transaction we had ever had. She turned and walked to the door. I followed her, Miles at my side. My father was waiting by the car. "Thank you," he said, not looking at me. "For the cocoa." Dahlia was last. She stood in front of me, her hands twisting. "Mackenzie," she started. And then she stopped talking. She lunged forward, and she hugged me. It was not a family photo hug. It was not a graceful posed embrace. It was a clumsy, desperate, real hug. Her arms wrapped tightly around my back, her face buried in the wool of my sweater. She was holding on, as if I were the only solid thing in the room. It lasted maybe 5 seconds. She pulled back, her face blotchy and red. She did not say a word. She just turned and hurried into the back seat of the car. We watched them drive away. The red taillights disappeared into the dusk. Miles put his arm around my waist. The table was still there. The pie was eaten. The dishes were clean. The work, for today, was done. The car doors were open. My father stood, waiting, his hand on the handle. Dahlia had just pulled back from our hug. Her face a mess of confusion and raw, sudden emotion. They were poised for flight, ready to retreat from the fragile, painful honesty of the last hour. "Wait," I said. My voice was quiet, but it had the weight of the new house. Everyone stopped. Vivian, who was already halfway to the car, turned. Graham let his hand fall from the door. "One more thing," I said. I looked past them, into the great hall. Piper and my grandmother, Edith, were still at the table, watching us. They had been the silent, necessary witnesses to the confessions. Piper had her violin case in her hand, ready to leave. Edith was bundled in her blankets. "Piper," I called out, "before you go, I need you. One last picture." Piper's eyes met mine. She did not ask why. She did not sigh. She simply put the violin case down, walked over to her equipment bag, and pulled out the heavy camera body and the tripod. She began to assemble it with a practiced, steady hand. I walked back into the house, past my family, who now stood awkwardly on the terrace, caught between the car and the table. I went to the windowsill, where the empty 8x10 wooden frame had sat, overlooking the table for the past week. I picked it up. I walked to the head of the table, where the 4 empty place settings had been. I placed the empty frame in the exact center, facing out. "Here," I said, motioning to my family. "All of us." "Mackenzie, my father started, gesturing to the car. "Here," I repeated, my voice gentle but absolute. I looked at Miles, at Edith, at my father, at Vivian, at Dahlia. "I want a picture of this, of today." They moved slowly, like a tide being pulled. They walked back onto the terrace, into the great hall. They gathered, a tight, awkward, unrehearsed cluster. I pointed, not to the front of the table, but to the end, to the chair that sat just outside, in the cold, the one with the green satin ribbon. "We'll stand there," I said. They looked confused. It was the chair for the forgotten, the symbol of an absence. Piper had the tripod set up, her back to the orchard. She looked through the lens. "Kenzie, it's a wide shot. I can fit you all. But the background, It's the whole table. It's perfect, I said. Widest lens you have. Make sure nothing is cut. She nodded, adjusting the focus. I walked over to the ribboned chair. My family, Graham, Vivian, Dahlia, Miles, Edith, stood behind it, a disorganized line, as if they were posing behind a prop. I reached out and my fingers touched the satin ribbon. I did not untie it. I pulled the knot. The bow fell away in my hand. Then, I did the one thing the chair was not designed for. I pulled it out from the table. The sound of its legs scraping on the cold stone was loud in the silence. And I sat down. I sat in the chair that was meant to be my past. I sat in the seat of the invisible girl. I occupied the space that was, until this moment, defined by its emptiness. There was a sharp collective intake of breath. This was not in the script. I looked up. I looked at Vivian. Her face was white. She understood. This was the true test. I had offered her a chair at the table. I had offered her pie. I had offered her a clean dish. Now I was offering her a place in the new frame, and I was defining my own position within it. She stood frozen for a second. I saw the calculation. I saw the lifetime of choosing the easy path war with this new, hard, honest moment. She took one step, then another. She walked to my side. She stood on my left. She did not touch me. She did not try to pose. She just stood there, next to the chair she had created, and then, slowly, she placed her hand on the high, wooden back. It was not a gesture of ownership. It was not a prop. It was an anchor. She was not blocking me. She was not hiding. She was just there, present. My father, seeing her, moved to my other side. He looked at the vast, impossible photograph Piper was trying to frame, the single table, the orchard, the stone walls, and this strange, symbolic cluster of people at its head. He cleared his throat. "Well," he said, his voice rough, "if the picture is too wide for the frame, I suppose we'll just have to buy a bigger wall." It was the first joke he had made in my presence that was not at someone's expense. Dahlia stepped up, standing next to Vivian. Miles stood next to my father, his hand resting on my shoulder, solid. Edith, 91, pushed her walker aside. She stood tall, in the center, directly behind me, and she raised the gnarled apple branch from the wedding, holding it up like a standard. "Piper," she called out, "are you getting this? Or am I holding this stick for my health?" Piper laughed. She hit the button. "Timer is on. 10 seconds." The small, red light on the camera began to blink. "Beep." I looked forward. I did not smile. I just was. "Beep." Vivian's hand tightened on the back of the chair. "Beep." My father squared his shoulders. "Beep." A single, perfect, unseasonable snowflake drifted down from the gray sky and landed on the dark oak of the table, just in front of the empty frame. "Beep." The camera focused. The knot. The one that had been tied inside me since I was 17. The one that had tightened on Christmas Eve. Finally, fully, let go. It did not break. It was just untied. Flash. The world went white, then dark. The moment was captured. Piper checked the back of the camera. "Oh," she said, her voice soft. "Oh, wow." She was using an instant camera, one that whirred and produced a small, developing square of film. She handed it to me. We all watched, huddled in the cold, as the image slowly resolved itself from a uniform gray. It was not a picture of a perfect family. It was not a picture of a performance. It was a picture of 6 people, all of them flawed, all of them standing in the forgiving light of a winter afternoon, clustered around a single, occupied chair. No one was in shadow, no one was cropped, everyone was present. I took the new, finished photograph. I walked back to the windowsill, where the empty frame had sat. I slipped the picture inside. It fit perfectly. I placed it back on the sill, this time, facing into the room. A new history, the first picture of this new, complicated, and finally honest system. As I turned, I saw a new detail. On the great dark beam above the head of the table, something glinted. It was a small, new brass plaque. Maeve must have installed it when she came by, her final act of construction. I walked over to read it. It was not a family motto, it was a house rule. This long table is open to those who show up. I looked back at the chair I had just vacated. The ribbon was gone. The meaning was changed. It was no longer the empty seat. It was the seat of principle. It was the chair that proved that the worst place in the old system could become the seat of honor in the new one. The knot was not untied with apologies. It was untied by presence, by the simple, terrifying, and transformative act of showing up. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are listening from, so please drop a comment below and share your thoughts. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to Lila Revenge Stories. Give this video a like, and you can support us even more by hitting that hype button, so this story can be heard by everyone who needs it.